All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott from Jeff Teaches Programming. And what I have been doing in the last video, starting in the last video, I guess, was going through this freecodecamp.org article, Learn TypeScript in 1 hour. But rather than having to watch the video with this avatar-ish figure here, I'm going through the examples myself. All right. All right, so let's just continue on then. I left off on functions. Type annotations in TypeScript are used to explicitly specify both the data types for the function parameters and their return values. All right, so we've got an example here. They call it a simple example, and I guess it is. It's called calculate rectangle area. Notice we have two things passed in. Something called long, or it should be probably length for L-E-N-G or something. That's a number. And width, which is also a number. And we return a number. So we return long times width. So when you call these, let's change these. Let's make this length. Then that means this will have to be length, and so will this, and so will this. Okay? So what should happen then is length goes into here, width goes into here, 5 times 3. So we're telling it to calculate it. We're passing them both in, and we return it. So it should say the area of the rectangle is 15. Now, we don't have to use, these are the actual parameter names here. Here, when we call this, we have to use the words length and width. But we can change this and just make this L and make this W. Just a little bit less typing, so L times W. And it should work just fine. So let's look and see if it does. All right. Now it says here length cannot redeclare block scoped variable length. Well, it might be that length is considered some kind of a keyword in here. Let's change it to len. See if it doesn't mind that. All right. So notice the area of the rectangle is 15. Works just fine. Now, what if we do this and we don't pass in, what if we leave this off and we leave this off and we leave this off? Well, notice I'm getting a complaint here, and it's telling me view problem. All right. And it says there's going to be some kind of a quick fix in here. Well, how about if we just do this? How about if we just put in L colon number? Well, you notice that error goes away, and W colon number. And now that goes away. What if we do that, but we don't indicate a return type? All right. So what if we do that? And we run it again. We still get the area of the rectangle is 15, so we don't have to include that. Now, I think this would work if we put in here any. This would be a silly way to do this. And any. And we ran it again. We again get the area is 15. I don't know why, again, you'd want to do that. One of the things I always try to impress upon my students, and I'm trying to impress upon this with you now, and that is do things the right way. All right? I used to think it took just as much time to do something wrong as it does to do it right, but it takes more time if you do have to turn around and then do it right. All right. So in the example here, it says we define a function called calculate rectangle area that takes two parameters. All right. The length and the width. We use type annotations to show, what both of these are going to look like. And we specify that it should return something of type number. We do the calculation and return the result. All right. Like many other programming languages, TypeScript, if you want to do so, allows you to have both optional parameters and default parameters. Optional means that basically you don't need it if you don't want to use it. So if we look at the example, it says here an optional parameter is one that may or may not be provided. To define an optional parameter, you use a question mark after the parameter name in the functions list. So we must provide a name, but providing an age is optional. So we're going to call this twice, once with Alice, and it just says hello Alice, and another time with Bob, but 30, and it should say hello Bob, you're 30 years old. So if we bring this one in, and again, let's get rid of what's here, and let's run that. It should say, hello Alice, and hello Bob, you are 30 years old. And it does. All right. Now, similar but not identical to these are default parameters. Let me talk to you for a second. Let's suppose, I worked for 8 years at a college that was out of St. Louis, Missouri. All right, and let's suppose that what they did was that everybody who wanted to apply to the college had to fill out some kind of a form. And let's also suppose that 90% of the people who were going to go to that college were from the state that the college was in. Well then, rather than having them have to put in Missouri, maybe you set it up as a default parameter. So in other words, if you don't put in there Missouri, it would default to that. So the way you do that is you actually give it a value. So now when we do this, it should say, hello Alice, you are 25 years old, because we did not provide an age. And hello Bob, you are 30 years old, because we did provide an age. Let's see if that works. We'll keep the functions that we had in there before. Just add those down here. All right. Run. Hello Alice, you are 25 years old, which again is the default value. And hello Bob, you are 30 years old for the value we provided. All right. Now, one thing, I did not teach JavaScript in this course. All right. But one of the things that JavaScript does provide for you are something that are known as a REST parameter. As it says here, a REST parameter allows a function to accept an indefinite number of arguments as an array. So let's say, and this is a good example here, we want to add up a bunch of elements. All right, and we're calling it here, but let's call it twice. And the second time, let's just pass in 3 things. All right, I can't remember what the plus true does. I'm sorry about that, but let's just put this in here. So this one should show you 60 if we did it right. So let's get rid of all these functions that we just added. Let's get rid of all of them and add this. All right. Now, Unfortunately, I left the add all out of there, so let's put that back in there. And what is this doing? This says nums is going to be an array of numbers. Result is equal to nothing, but then add up every number that we have and put it into result, and then return that result. So let me add this back in there, which I should have done to begin with. So we'll put it right there, and now let's bring this in. And notice, I guess it was 61 the second time. That has something to do with this plus true. Let's just get that out of there for both times. I looked it up, but I don't really remember what it said. So let's try it again. There, 170.5 and 60. But the point is, we're calling the same function twice with a different number of parameters. We can do that by using that rest parameter. All right, there is an arrow function in here. An arrow function is basically, it's known as a shortcut. So we've got here this add with arrow. And what's the advantage of doing this as opposed to what we had done earlier when we wanted to add two numbers? It's all on one line, so it's more compact. Let's put in different numbers in here. So let's put in 22 and 55, and the output should be 77 if we did it right. And there's 77. So it's a shortcut. All right. We could have gone back and rewritten this. But what's nice is rather than actually writing a function, we are in essence writing a function, but we're telling it to do everything and immediately take the result and put the result in here. All right. You can run an anonymous function. An anonymous function is basically an unnamed function. Okay, rather than declaring a name function, you define the function directly as an expression. And that's what we're doing here. So again, let's run it again. We'll put in here, I don't know, 11 and 100. And the output should be 111. So what are we doing here? We're saying add, all right, equals function, and we're doing it like this, and we're returning it right away. But we're never declaring the name of the function. It's an unnamed function, rather. And as it says, anonymous functions are often used in various scenarios, okay? They're particularly useful when you need a small function that you're going to call once. And when they talk about polluting this global scope, what they mean is that typically functions hang around as long as the program hangs around. Now, is that always true? The answer is no. It depends on a lot of things. And I'm not going to get into that right now. All right, did we get 111? Whoops, I don't know. Well, look at that. Okay, somehow went back to that add with arrow. I don't know why, but it did. That's okay. Let's move that over. Let's bring this in again and see if we get 111. And we do. All right, void and never. Void is used to mean nothing. So if you've got a function that returns void, it returns nothing. All right. Or it can return undefined. As it says, it's often used to annotate functions that perform actions or side effects but don't produce any meaningful result. So this is a greeting. And we're saying, you know, basically it's going to say hello followed by whatever name you pass in, but it's not returning anything, so we'll just make it type void. All right. Then there's never. Notice the never type, as it says there, is used to represent values that never occur. You use it with functions that never return. Quite often you might use this, like as it says, like an infinite loop. All right, let's see where we are for time here. We're at 15, and arrays really wasn't that long in here with the examples that they gave, so we'll quickly talk about arrays. An array typically is set up as something that will hold multiple values of the same type. So they've got a fruits array here. It's an array of strings that's called fruits, and it holds apple, banana, and cherry. You can run through it then and loop through it, and this should, if this is done correctly, it should print all three of them out. But all of them, is we use the two uppercase, so they should all be printed out in uppercase. Let's see if that happens. Do we get apple, banana, and cherry in uppercase? And we do. Now you can have an array, all right, a simple array, or you can have what's called a multidimensional array. Now look at this example here because it is different. We've got array 1, which is declared as an array of number, and we've got array 2, which is declared as an array of strings. Then we've got array 3, and this is the first time we're seeing this. This pipe sign says that array 3 can contain strings or numbers. All right. So it allows you to mix different types. Okay. Next we've got tuples here. A tuple, as it says, is a data type in TypeScript similar to an array but with a fixed number of elements. And as it says, you can specify the types of each element at specific locations. So notice what we have here, a tuple type. This says the first element must be a number, the second element must be a string, and the third element must be a Boolean. You can come back, as it says, and assign. Now we've got article, and that it would work. But if we try to put a new element in there, we'll get an error because we've said that this is the only thing that this contains. And enum, short for enumeration, is typically it's a user-defined data type. All right, here's an example, and it's the one that most people use with enum. So we've got a new enumeration, a new data type called days. Its members are Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And I believe enums, because I know they do in other languages, start with 0. So Sunday would be 0, Monday would be 1, etc. All right. Now, what I'm going to do, just so we have something a little different in here, I'm going to grab all this and I'm going to copy it. Put it in here. Let's call this months. Oops. Let's call this months. And we're going to try to change this. I'm going to say January equal 1. And then we're going to put all the months in here. February, March, April, May, June, you know them, July, August, September, October, November, and December. All right. And then we will say const current month will be of type months, and it's going to be days dot June. And we'll say the current month is months current month. All right, so we'll use both examples that are here. Hopefully I wrote it and didn't make any errors. If I did, you'll find out when I do. Didn't like this. June does not exist. Because it's not days.June, it's months.June. All right, and we get today is Wednesday and the current month is June. That's usually how this is used. There's a lot of usages for it, though. For example, I've seen where people like to use, maybe you're defining a bunch of different types of trees or something like that. You know, you've got, call it trees, and you can put in there elm, birch, you know, etc. So in the first example, as it says, we created an enum called days with a list of constant values. And how about this? In the first example, all right, I'm going to copy all this. And then in the second example, we created an enum called months with a list of constant values starting from, whoopsie, from 1. We assign the value months dot June to the variable current month, and then we used months current month to retrieve and display the month associated with a value in current month. As it says, enums can make code more readable by providing human readable names for specific values. All right, and they're commonly used for things like days of the week, status codes. There's a lot of places you can potentially use these. Now, I'm going to stop here, but I want to warn you that what comes next is more complex than what we've dealt with thus far. So we'll pick it up with interfaces on the next video. Talk to you then.